before you start any fitness program, you should establish some ultimate goals. But believe it or not, you may have decided your ultimate fate before you even take your first step. Believing your way to success today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Like most people that get into this field, I also was an athlete. I had a wonderful privilege of being not only a high school athlete, I got a chance to do some pole vaulting in college, but as others in this field, many of us start out as athletes, and therefore we typically get the opportunity to do some coaching, which usually can be the driving force behind us becoming personal trainers. Now, my coaching was in gymnastics and track and field, but I have to say my absolute favorite time coaching was when I got to do some springboard diving coaching in 1993 and 1995 for a local country club here in my hometown. Now, I'd been a diver. I actually started out as a swimmer, then a diver, then I got into gymnastics for diving. And though I never competed year-round in any of those sports, never actually competed in gymnastics, though I was involved in it and actually coached for 20 years. That led me to being a pole vaulter, which is what I ultimately did in high school and in college. But my most favorite coaching was springboard diving. With those two teams I got to coach in 1993 and 1995. And the reason I guess they were so exciting were I had a lot of special kids that I got a chance to work with. And in 4 different states, I worked with thousands of kids through a few different sports, mostly gymnastics. But these two teams, my 1993 country club team and my 1995 country club team, stand out. They're definitely a special group of kids, and some of them I still keep in touch with today. But I probably learned the most about what drives me as a trainer and the beginnings of what set up the culture at Personal Edge from those two teams. I'll tell you why. I had a love for that sport. I had a love for gymnastics, and I had a love for, of course, track and field. But my abilities as far as coaching were concerned were probably the best in gymnastics. And then track and field, even though I was a pole vaulter in high school and college, my gymnastics coaching was better. And probably the knowledge base for the sport itself was the lowest with springboard diving. And yet I call that my favorite two teams to teach. I realized why sometime later. And that was because what I lacked, the knowledge of the sport and actually throwing the different dives and what have you, I had to make up as a head coach in how I reached my athletes' minds and how I got them to believe in themselves and got them to excel. Both teams went undefeated. The largest meet that we ever competed in was a city meet. This was a summer league, so it was a very short season. And both teams were city champions. And so I'm quite proud of that. And I was coaching against some tremendous coaches. To this day, I think the world of them. 2 of them were collegiate divers. Actually, 3 of them that I coached against, across 93 and 95, were collegiate divers and knew far more about the mechanics of the sport than I did. In fact, one of them, I call him a friend today. He and I were actually competitors when we were kids against each other. And there were many times in the season that I would reach out to him to help me work through the mechanics of a rather difficult dive for one of my divers. And being the incredibly gracious person he was, and also somebody who wanted to see every diver excel, he was gracious enough to help me and comply. And to this day, I'm very thankful. The reason I bring those up, it has to do with the topic I'm talking about today, and that is your success in your fitness program, your success really in anything, but your success in your fitness program definitely in setting your goals, many times is determined prior to you even taking the first step, even beginning to get involved in your chosen task, whether it's weight loss, whether it's a fitness goal, whether it's winning a race, whether it's competing in your first 5K, whatever, walking again, doesn't matter. Many times, your fate is determined in that first decision. Now, I'm going to tell you something I learned from that 93 team. I learned many lessons, but 2 that I tell the stories all the time But I had a 9-year-old kid teach me about self-esteem. Now, I love this story, and I hope you don't mind me telling it, but we nicknamed all of our divers. It was a way to motivate them. It was a way to make it a fun atmosphere. But we found it as a great tool. We would come up with some really neat nicknames. I had a diver that didn't question my coaching, which I really appreciated. Not that I had a whole lot of divers question my coaching, but to the point that we were early on in the season. And actually, this is the first time I'd ever coached a diving team. So thankfully, I had Mary Curtis was my assistant. She was a diver herself. She knew how to score. She knew a lot of the mechanics of it. And she really didn't want to be a head coach, but she was a wonderful assistant because I knew nothing about judging, and the coaches did the judging, so she did all my judging. And if I had trouble with some of the mechanics of the dive, there she was to help me put that together. So I greatly appreciated that. But she actually helped me nickname some of the kids. And back to what I was saying a minute ago about this one kid who didn't question my diving. Mary Curtis knew all the different things that the kids were doing. I was too busy keeping up with the logistics of running a team and making sure we had the dive sheets and making sure the kids were in order and somewhere at the right pool at the right time and dealing with the parents. I did not realize all the dives that this particular diver could do. It was one of our first meets, and we had filled out his dive sheet incorrectly. We left a dive off. His third dive, he's a young guy, and they only did 3 dives. His third dive was left off. And so he's standing on the diving board, and they start calling me as the coach, asking me, what's his third dive? I racked my brain. I know this kid. His father happened to be in business with my father, but I looked at him and just got deer in headlights. I had no idea what this third dive was. And third dive was typically a more difficult dive. And so I just looked at him. I said, why don't you throw a back flip? He just nodded his head and he threw a back flip. About 20 minutes after that and he scored well with it and did pretty good in the meet. And later on, I looked at some notes that we had and on the divers, and I realized something. I looked at him. I said, have you ever done a back flip before? And he said, no. And I said, was that your first one? He said, yeah. And I said, why did you do it? And he said, well, you told me to. Well, we nicknamed that kid Crash because he really would try anything. And he loved that nickname and what have you. So we had various funny nicknames, and pardon me for taking so long to tell you that story, because I'm actually going to talk about Hollywood. Now, the nickname game was pretty neat, and I would recommend it to coaches because if you make up cool nicknames, that's what the kids want to be known by. If you want their attention, you call them by their first name, and you don't need to do much more than that. So, but Hollywood's was pretty spectacular, and I have to credit Mary Curtis with nicknaming this incredible athlete, good-looking kid, heartwarmer as far as he could steal the eye of parents, of the young girls, what have you. He was and on top of that, he was an incredible athlete. And his name was Matt, and we called Matt Hollywood. And so Hollywood did something really neat. Hollywood was the first 9-year-old in my state to throw a back 1.5 off the 1-meter board. What was really neat was Hollywood and I were warming up one day at a meet, and we did something kind of funny. We realized something real quick, that the coaches had an interesting way of picking how they were going to judge. Now, I don't fault the coaches on this by any means, but we realized that they would kind of set a bar. Now, what would happen is the kids would dive, and they almost all went in the same order. They did a front dive, then a back dive, and then they would do their more difficult dive. So everybody started with their easiest and kind of moved up, and it got boring. And what would happen when the coaches would set the bar, they were judges, but they were actually the head coaches, typically, except for Mary Curtis, my assistant, they would set the bar by, all of a sudden a kid would throw really a spectacular front dive. It would just be head and shoulders above all the rest of the kids. And that would set the bar. They would say, okay, that on a scale of 1 to 10 is an 8. So everything's going to be judged by that. Well, Hollywood usually came at the end, and we knew that the coaches did this. So what we did, you could order your dives any way you wanted. And so we would order Hollywood's dives by his hardest first. And he was incredibly talented. Nothing scared him as far as throwing a dive was concerned. So when these kids were throwing front dives, and one kid would throw something spectacular, and they would set that bar, all of a sudden here comes Hollywood, and Hollywood would throw a spectacular 1.5 open pike. All of a sudden they realized if that other kid was an 8, then he's got to be a 9 or 8.5. It was a little trick we played. We really didn't need to play it because he was very talented. I don't think he ever lost. But this is the kind of kid he was. He was really amazing. We also would, in the warm-ups, I would call out and ask him things in front of the other kids. And, hey, Hollywood, we're going to throw the front double today. And he would look at me and said, "No, I think I'm gonna save that till later. I don't really want to do that right now." At the time, he didn't have a front double, but the other kids would hear that and get a little bit intimidated. Maybe that wasn't fair, but pretty neat kid I was dealing with. Well, we were at a meet out of town. And when we were in town, all the kids knew each other. They kind of knew who were the better divers. But out of town, they didn't know. So they're all kind of testing the mettle. They're trying to watch and see how the kids are doing in warm-ups. Well, Hollywood and I are playing our games. And Hollywood's just nailing some. On top of all that, he was a tremendous diver. And he's just nailing some incredible stuff. Well, you've seen the kids before. They're a lot like that Looney Tunes you see with the big bulldog and the little dog. And the little dog is talking to the big bulldog. He's all impressed by the big bulldog. But the big bulldog, we find out at the end of the Looney Tunes that the big bulldog's really not that tough. The real tough one is actually the little bulldog. Well, we had a situation like that. It was a big kid, and he was a rather intimidating figure. And he kept talking to this little kid that was evidently on the same team. And he would whisper something to that little kid. That little kid would come over to Hollywood and ask him a question. And we realized this little dynamic going on. It was kind of interesting. One of the team mothers was standing next to me when we were watching this go on. Hollywood would throw a dive. Big kid would whisper something to little kid. Little kid would come over to Hollywood, and he said the first thing he asked him was, "You're really good, aren't you?" Well, Hollywood looked him dead in the eye and nodded his head up and down. Now, he's 9 years old. He gets up and throws another spectacular dive. He gets back into line to warm up again. Big kid whispers something to the little kid. Little kid walks over to Hollywood and says, "You're going to win, aren't you?" And Hollywood looked him in the eye and nodded his head up and down. About that time, the parent that was standing next to me leaned over to me. Her name was Judy. And Judy said, "Garrett, you need to talk to Hollywood about his ego." I thought about that for a second. And I looked at her and I said, "Tell you what, if he loses, I will." Right at that point in time, I had a 9-year-old kid teach me the difference between self-esteem and ego. It's simple. What was he supposed to tell the kid? The kid asked him, the first question was, "Are you good?" Well, let's see. He was undefeated. He was throwing some of the most difficult dives of any kid of that age, and he was the first 9-year-old in the state of Alabama to throw a back 1.5 off the 1 meter. Yeah, I think anybody would say that he was good. He asked him the next question, "Are you going to win?" Well, let's see. I coached him for 2 years. I coached him in 93 and 95. I'm not sure how he did in 94. I never saw him lose. We were at yet another meet. We knew the competition. Yeah, he's going to win. The Paul Harvey on that is, of course, Hollywood did win the meet. And in doing so, proved what I was saying. That's the difference between self-esteem and ego. Now, why do I bring that up? Hollywood knew what he could do, and more importantly, he believed in himself. I learned early on that what I lacked in coaching ability as far as teaching the mechanics of a dive, I needed to make up for by teaching every child from 6 years old all the way to 15 to believe in themselves. And that's what I'm talking about today in this podcast. Too many times I have people come in my office, and 72% of the people come to us for weight loss. We've taught 4 people to walk again. We've got 14 scholarships to our name. We do everything in fitness and sport that's not illegal, immoral, or fattening. So I see it all. And I don't think I've ever had anybody come into my office without a goal of some sort. And the goal can be just getting in shape. Since we have 35% of our clientele over the age of 65, many of them come in with, "Hey, look, I'm just looking to keep moving." Many times that's coupled with, "I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to get big, I'm not interested in being Mr. Universe, but I'm just interested in keeping moving." All those are good goals: losing weight, staying fit, getting ready for trying to get a scholarship. A gentleman came in my office the other day and is planning a year from now. There's a retirement in his future, and he wants to get back to racing. But many times, right after that comment is made, that particular individual shows me how they decided that they're never going to get there. The book that comes to mind when I think about this, it's very valuable. If you've never read it, do yourself a favor. Don't pass go, don't collect $200 without reading this book. They should teach this book and one other as a college course. They should teach it as a high school course. I learned about these two books from a fantastic speaker. He's the #1 speaker in Vintage International, of which I'm a member. And he speaks about these two books, and he said he read them so many times that they actually became a part of him. Something like 9 times. He read it every single month for 9 months until they became a part of him. And one of the books, of course, and we won't get too much into this today, and that is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. You want to learn how to deal with people anywhere in your life. Inhale that book. Written in like the 1930s and still fantastic today. It's what the Carnegie courses are built on. And every business book is built on actually these two books. I'd read that one first. The second one, and what I'm talking about today, about whether or not deciding to actually reach your goal, is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Again, written somewhere in the 1930s, and all of the information is still as valuable today. It starts off in the first chapter talking about thoughts are things. And I encounter that every time I sit down with a new client. What I'm looking for is, I'm not looking for so much the exercises they like to do or don't like to do, or what exercises I need to teach them. That's easy. My staff and I eat, sleep, and drink that stuff. That's the easy part. What I'm looking for is, where's your head? What do you really want to attain? What is your why? It's extremely important. We've talked about that before. The why determines everything. Nobody comes to us for a physical reason. Everybody comes to us for a mental reason. If you got a rotator cuff damage and it doesn't bother you at all, doesn't change your lifestyle, you can care less about it, you're not coming to me to get it fixed. Whether or not you need it doesn't matter. If it bothers you in your head, you'll be here. You may have been overweight all your life. All of a sudden you show up at my door. Something happened that drove you to be there. That's your why. And so when you're telling me your goal is 20 pounds, losing 20 pounds, 30 pounds, 12 pounds, 5 pounds, I want to walk again, I want to get a D1 scholarship, all of those we can attain. But usually after you tell me that, many times, within the next few statements, a client will tell me if they're going to be successful or not. I'll show you what I mean. I see this with pretty much everything, but I'll see it with weight loss. I want to lose 20 pounds. Now, I don't like this, and I don't like this, and I don't want to change this and do the throwing up of hands, which is people, if you can imagine this, putting their hands up in front of me and saying, now look, as in like a stop motion. I don't want to change my food. I don't want to drink a lot of water. I don't want to do this exercise. I don't want to do that. Okay, those are limiting factors. They also can set you up for success or failure. I see it with athletes. I see it with athletes in that I'll do anything, but I don't like this. I don't like that. I did this exercise, didn't really care for it. I'm not successful because of this other person. Very limiting factors. They've basically set the parameters, no matter how hard we push. Physically, they've set the parameters on whether or not we're going to succeed. But the most common one I see has to do with age. And I know you're not surprised to hear me talk about that, especially if you've listened to podcasts, Personalized Fitness Podcast 12 through 16, which is the podcast series on the lie of age. I highly, highly, highly recommend you listen to it. But I'll have somebody that'll sit down, and they're here because of quote-unquote age. They're starting to decrease ability. And the first thing they'll tell me is, now I am XYZ age. Now, why do I say that's a limiting factor? And you may believe, well, Garrett, you need to know their age because that tells you their ability. It tells me nothing. Nothing about their ability. It does tell me something about their mind. It does tell me something about what they believe. Think about it. Why are they telling me their age? The only reason they're telling me that is because they believe it has some limiting effects. And I've seen it all. I've seen somebody come in and tell me, now listen, I know that I am 86. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, Garrett, of course. They got to tell you they're 80. Oh, my Lord, 86. Yeah, don't think much about that with my 86-year-old client who started with me almost 20 years ago. and is still pressing the same dumbbells he was pressing 10 years ago because we built him up to a certain level, and he kind of likes being right there. And now he's 86. Well, of course he can, because he's built it over time. No, time does not dictate your ability. If you don't believe it, again, podcast number 12 through 16, The Lie of Age. So that person, they tell me their age, they have built in their mind, no matter if I ask them to lay it out or not, the whole reason they're telling me that number is because they believe it has a limiting factor. It limits them in their ability. So no matter how hard we work, they don't believe they can get any better than that age, and more importantly, what they believe that age means. I have the same thing when I have people come in and tell me I want to do it now because I am this age, because when I get to be older, I won't be able to. Again, a limiting factor. I don't mean to be too braggadocious. I do like to tell the truth, and I am a Southern gentleman. I know what side to walk on the street. When I'm escorting my wife downtown, I say, "Grace, ma'am, I'll hold the chair for the right people and pull doors. I carry a pocket knife and a handkerchief. I am a Southern gentleman, but I'll be very direct about this. I've been a personal trainer for 29 years. I run the #1 personal training facility in my state and top 5 in the Southeast. We have a less than 20% turnover. Average tenure of a client's 8 years. I ran 42 clients for 7 years with a less than 20% turnover. I'm a good trainer. But no matter what I do, if I can't get you to change the way you think, there will be a limiting factor to what I can do with you physically. Period. And I don't care who your trainer is, or if you're a trainer, I don't care who you are. Unless you can get somebody to make that right decision, get somebody to open up those possibilities, you're never physically going to get them there. I don't care how good you think you are. You're never going to make anybody do anything. And talking about athletics, I mentioned I was a pole vaulter. That was a lot of fun. I thoroughly enjoyed being a pole vaulter. I thoroughly enjoyed being a short pole vaulter. A lot of people think that that's just a cover-up I use, but actually the fact that I'm a towering 5'6" is something that I've always thoroughly enjoyed. I guess a lot of it comes from when I was a pole vaulter, because there weren't very many tall pole vaulters, and I was told by high school coaches, not mine, mind you, by competitive high school coaches, in other words, competitors, other schools, that I would only jump so high, or first thing, I wouldn't be a varsity pole vaulter, and then I would never clear 10 feet, which was opening height at the time, and that I would never excel much past that. I would never win state. I was told every single one of those, and I'm so thankful that, and it sounds sort of strange, that coaches were coming up and saying that to you. Yes, as a happenstance, I was ended up in conversations where I was hearing those things. Or indirectly, I was hearing it. Somebody said, "Yeah, this coach said you couldn't do it." I'm so glad I heard those, because that's what drove me. Because I wanted to prove them wrong, and I believed I could. That made a big difference in my life. But something I learned from pole vaulting, which is the fantastic metaphor for what I'm talking about, is a vaulter. If you know a vaulter and they don't know this, please tell them. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tip. It's 100% true. If you're going up in the air and trying to clear a bar, and you see the bar, you lay your eyes on the bar and you keep staring at the bar, you're going to miss. I'll tell you why. Looking at the bar, you're going to kick it off every single time. Why? Because your body follows your head follows your eyes. If your eyes are looking at the bar, guess where your feet are going? They're going right into that bar. Whenever I was coaching pole vaulting, I always told a kid, if he sees the bar, throw his head backwards. Look straight towards the sky. Look behind you if you have to. Get upside down that way. And that actually will bring your feet up. And it's an interesting metaphor, because if you're walking in my office, and I actually had this happen, gentleman wanting to get in shape, wanting to get better off, and so I said, "So tell me, what are you looking for?" And his first thing he told me, can't believe this. He said, "Well, now, Garrett, I'm 48. Some of you, hopefully all of you, should be laughing at that. Garrett, I am 48. What has that got to do with the price of tea in China?" Well, he sat and told me, "I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this." His bar was 48. And I'm guessing, I can only guess that 49 and 50 and 51, they only got worse. So he was kicking the bar off at 48. What happens when he gets to 49, 50, 51? Well, if he's training with us, I'm hoping, of course, that gets better. Not because of his physical abilities, but what he believes about himself. How do you fix that? It can be fixed. I pretty well dedicated my life to it. I thoroughly enjoy that side of what I do. How can you fix it? I'll give you the recipe that works 100% of the time. First thing, start out with that book I told you. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Forget about the name. It talks a lot about money in there. It can be used for any goal whatsoever, and it will tell you step by step exactly how to achieve your goals. I'll guarantee you this. If you pick a goal and you follow it to a T, every step that book tells you, you will succeed, period. That's the first thing. Second thing, as simple as it may seem, the first thing you have to do is believe you can. So if you're starting a goal and your first belief is, well, I can't, got to fix that first. As I say in my podcast on live aging, again, folks, live aging, podcast 12 through 16. As I say in that one, the 4 components of ability are fitness, which is activity, nutrition, lifestyle, and the most important, which is the 4th. And if you get this one wrong, you'll get everything else wrong, and that's mindset. And that's what I'm talking about. If you set that bar at 48 and everything that you believe that means, as far as ability is concerned, that's it. You're going to fail. Or you may get better, but you're not going to get to where you could be. You're not really going to hit your goal. So that's the next thing, is that making sure you believe that you can. Most of the tips that I would give beyond that go along with the chapters of that particular book. By the way, I'm getting no endorsement by talking about Think and Grow Rich. And the third is educate yourself. The limitations that you think are there may not be there. It goes for everything, but of course, if it's a concern of yours dealing with your health, fitness, and wellness, well, feel free to reach out. Be more than glad to talk to you about it. Just talk about the possibilities. Thoughts are things, and believe it or not, is when it comes to your goals, you can literally think them into being. This is just one more way that we help you live your level of wellness. This is Garrett Williamson. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.